This video will show you how to do an introduction and reference page for a research paper in Microsoft Word in APA format. So to do this, open a Word document and then go to Layout, Margins, and make sure that they're 1 inch all around. Then go to Home, click Select All, and click on the caret next to Paragraph, and make sure the spacing before and after is 0 and the line spacing is double. Then go up to the caret and make it 12-point font Times New Roman. So the title page in APA format needs to have a slightly different header than the second page and every other page thereafter. So the way to do that, click on Insert, click on Header, click on Blank, and then click here where it says Different First Page. So on the first page, you have to have the words Running Head, colon, and then your title all in caps. Now this does have to be in 12-point font Times New Roman, and sometimes you have to do it a couple of times to make it stick. So then you're going to put your title, and your title in a research paper should tell us what your independent and dependent variables are. So let's say you're doing a project where you're trying to get people to conform to your group members' behavior of looking up at the top of a building. So maybe you have a couple of group members looking up at the top of the building in some conditions, and in other conditions you have 10 group members looking up to the top of a building. So you're manipulating how many people are looking up. Let's say you're also manipulating how attractive the group is, that in some of the conditions the people are dressed very nicely, and in some of the conditions people are dressed very poorly. So a good title for this study would be The Effects of Group Size and Group Attractiveness on Conformity. This tells me that the independent variables are group size and group attractiveness, and the dependent variable is conformity. So I type that all in caps here after the words Running Head. Now there is a rule in APA format that the header cannot go over one line with the words Running Head and a page number inserted. So in this case, I'm running over a line, so I have to do a shortened version of the title. So I'm going to remove the word the and the word group here to see if I can fit it all on one line. And I can. So then I press Tab and I insert a page number there. Then I double click to get out of that screen. So on the title page, I want to list the title again halfway down the document, and it needs to be middle justified. And this should be the full version of the title, not in all capital letters. Once you're done with the title, press Enter so you double space down, and then list everybody's names. If there's more than one person, then you would put an and before the second to last person and the last person in the list. Then press Enter and enter your affiliation, which is a fancy word for school name. And your class information. Now you're done, so insert a page break to go to the second page. Now your second page has a slightly different header, so to get to that header, you would double click where it says Type Here. And then you would type the title all in caps without the word Running Head. And in this case, we have to type the shortened version of the title. Press tab and then insert a page number. And make sure it is 12-point font Times New Roman. Now the second page has the abstract, so we put that title all in bold, and we would write on this page an 150 to 250 word summary of your paper. But the abstract is written last, so when you're writing your introduction and reference page, all you need here is a placeholder, some note to self to remind you that you need to put a summary of the paper here, but you don't write it until after you've written a full draft, so you know what to put in this abstract in this summary. And then after the abstract, you would put insert page break again, so you could start on the third page. So the third page is actually where your paper introduction starts. And in APA format, we don't use the word introduction to title the introduction. Instead, we put the title again, not all in caps, and it would be the full title. So the effects of group size and group attractiveness on conformity. Then your very first paragraph of your introduction should list a vivid example of your topic or a very famous incident. Once you've done that, then you should define any major terms that are listed in that example. So here, that example should be about conformity, and then you would have to list and define that term within that paragraph, making sure that it all flows nicely and it follows spelling and grammar rules. So I might paraphrase that definition for conformity and say conformity is yielding to real or imagined group pressure. Now, since I didn't come up with that definition, I need to give a citation for it. So I could cite the textbook authors, and I would do that since they're not subjects in the sentence, in parentheses at the end of the sentence with their names separated by an and sign and then a comma and the year that that book was published. So this is how you would cite something in APA format that's a paraphrase, not a direct quote. Now, anytime I use a reference, I should add it to my reference page because it's a lot of points if I miss a reference. So I'm going to go to Insert, Page, Page Break, and then I'm going to start a reference page. So the reference page is titled by the word references, and that word is to be bolded. Then I want to have my cursor all the way to the left, and I want to have a hanging indent. So the way to do that is I click on the caret next to the word paragraph. I go to this indentation section, and I click on the caret underneath special and click on hanging and press OK. So in APA format, a reference is given by the author's last name first, and then just the first initials. So your textbook author, his last name is Aronson, comma, then E period, and then you do a comma, the and sign, and the last and second textbook author, which is Aronson, comma, J period, their father and son duo. Then it's 2018, surrounded by parentheses, because that's the year it was published. And then I have the title of the book, The Social Animal. Then I would have the edition. And I would want to make sure that that is all italicized, as a title in APA format should be. And then you'd have the location of the publisher. And if there's more than one location listed, you pick the one closest to you. and then a colon and the name of the publisher. So it's Worth Publishers for us. So this would be the full reference for that definition we just gave. So go back up to the introduction. So we have this paragraph where we've started out with examples, given important definitions, and then our second paragraph is going to start talking about the first piece of research that we found on this topic. And for every piece of research, so you're going to do this for 5 pieces of research because this assignment requires 5 scholarly sources. You're going to find somebody who's doing their own research, so not summarizing somebody else's research, but collecting their own data, and you're going to make sure it's peer reviewed. So a good way to do that is use PsycInfo. Everything on PsycInfo, that database, is going to be peer reviewed, meaning experts in the field are going to review the study and decide this is a good study, good enough to be published. It's conducted without too many flaws, so we're putting our stamp of approval by letting it be published here. So in order to describe your study well, what you need to do in this next paragraph is you need to, in paragraph form, and again you want to make sure that the sentences flow logically, you want to state who was in the study, what was done, so especially what type of study, was it a quasi-experiment, a meta-analysis, a correlational study, a survey, what was found, and in particular how it relates to your study. So since this study is on conformity, you would want to talk about what the findings were in regards to conformity and either group size or attractiveness if that was manipulated. And then you want to end this paragraph with an explicit statement of what the take-home message should be. So this study suggests that bigger groups will increase conformity. Right? So something that says this study suggests or implies or makes us think that we should expect this sort of outcome. Okay, so it's a sum-up sentence telling us what we should take home from the other people's research study. So you're going to do this 5 times in the introduction, 1 paragraph per scholarly research study. And then at the end of all of those paragraphs, you're going to describe your own research study with the hypotheses and your rationale for the hypotheses, and you're going to explicitly state what the independent and dependent variables are. So remember, this study is manipulating group size and group attractiveness, so this is how I might start that last paragraph out. So this would be paragraph number 7 of your introduction. Our study investigated the effects of group size and group attractiveness on conformity by having several people look up at the top of the building and assessing how many bystanders copied them. We hypothesized that bigger groups would produce greater conformity because previous research by Solomon Asch and others, and you would put the citation there, shows that bigger groups produce greater conformity. So here we have one of your hypotheses and a rationale, and that rationale is referring to previous research on the topic. Then we list our second hypothesis with its rationale. We also hypothesized that more attractive groups would produce higher conformity because of previous research by so-and-so, and you would cite that. Our independent and dependent variables were, so we would list these separately. Our independent variables were group size and group attractiveness. Our dependent variable was conformity. And you're required to operationalize this, which means you're required to state exactly how you measured your dependent variable. So you would state that here, right after you say our dependent variable is so-and-so or such and such, then you would list how you measured it. We measured conformity as the number of people who looked up at the top of the building, period. Okay, so this paragraph succinctly says, here's what my variables are, here's what my hypotheses are, here's why I believe my hypotheses are going to come out as I expect them, and it's pointing to previous research. So your 5 studies that you are describing in the introduction should say something about how your variables should impact conformity. So those 5 studies, some of them should be about group size and conformity, and some should be about group attractiveness and conformity, so that you have this logical argument to make that bigger groups and more attractive groups would produce higher conformity. And then when you're done with that paragraph, so our last paragraph of the introduction is where you first describe your study, then you start a new section just double spaced down with the word methods and bolded. So what you're going to turn in on the day listed in the syllabus is an APA formatted title page. You're going to have a page with just the word abstract bolded, but not actually an abstract in it because you write that last. And then several pages of an introduction that start out with one paragraph with a vivid example of your topic and some important definitions. The next 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4, paragraph 5, paragraph 6 should be individual paragraphs describing a scholarly study, stating who is in the study, what was done, what was found, and then what that study suggests towards your particular study. And then paragraph 7 should be a description of your study, laying out the variables and laying out the hypotheses and laying out the rationale. Then you have the word methods, double spaced down from the end of that paragraph, and then on a new page will be your references in APA format. So here is a very good example of how to do an introduction and reference page in APA format in Microsoft Word.